So this is a fairly short video, I think, but unusually I don't have a guitar in my hand for this particular one because it's about how to write down stuff, and this is a little alternative I'm going to introduce you to using tab or musical notation, as it were, or dots. The reason I developed this was having taught over quite a few decades now. I was looking for a really easy way just to communicate what I wanted players to do, and one of the things we always used to have in our lessons was what we called our riffs page. It was like a sort of a sugar apart from the medicine, if you will. So we'd learn something which was a bit tough and then maybe say, well, here's the riff from so-and-so, and this is great fun to play. So this is an alternative. It's not a replacement. I've actually used all three systems in varying quantities on different projects depending on what I'm doing. So it's very important to have a sort of a respect for all of them, I think. Anyway, so here's what we do. I want you to think of the 6 strings on a guitar and imagine them like a stick of rock, okay, or a stick of candy, if you will. And run down the middle of each of those is the number of the strings. So the 6th string look like that. Okay? Okay. And then we want to know, what are we going to play on that string? Well, we're going to have an open string, and then we're going to have a note at the 3rd fret, and then we're going to have a note at the 4th fret. So here's our string, and here are our frets. Okay, now if we want to change strings, then we just write the number of the next string we want to use. So it works very similar to tablature, but just it enables you to write on a blank piece of paper. Now this enables you to put in, let's say, various other notes. So I'm just going to scribble a couple of things here, where one note's hammered to another, and a little bit of nagging, as teachers are wont to do. So you end up doing something like that. Okay. Now, as I say, no means of writing down music is foolproof, because, you know, if it was, you wouldn't have to play something to somebody. You could just read it to them, couldn't you? But it is very, very useful just for making quick notes. You don't need manuscript paper, you don't need tab paper. You can just scribble something down and get what you need to say across very easily. It's also handy if you imagine that being combined with, say, another bit of study, and we're talking about chord construction here, quite a lot of thinking, arrows going different places, question marks, etc. So it's a nice little system to use if you don't fancy getting involved in using tab or dots. Now, just while we're on the subject of making very simple little notes here, and this is a really, really useful thing to do, and it's to do with your practice. When you practice, let's suppose you get a really good session in, say you've been practicing for 2 hours or whatever. The most productive part of that 2 hours is usually the last 10 minutes. So, very useful piece of equipment. Okay, what you do, you make a voice note. So let's give you an example. Okay, I've been practicing for 2 hours. I've just discovered what that diminished chord is. So next time I come back, don't forget to start on the 3rd fret instead of the 4th fret, because that means it will be a C diminished instead of C sharp. So that's what we've got, a quick note. And then when you come back the next day, okay, I've been practicing for 2 hours. I've just discovered what that diminished chord is. So next time I come back, don't forget to start on the 3rd fret instead of the 4th fret, because that means it will be a C diminished instead of C sharp. Okay, so I think that, I hope, demonstrates that very, very easily. You just leave yourself a voice note, so when you come back to practice, you're not quite in the same place as you'd be after playing for 2 hours, but you're in that moment and you can remember what it was you were doing. Okay, so more videos to follow. In fact, the next 2 I'm going to embark on are going to be about the other 2 methods. So one is just clarifying a couple of things about how tabs are written, and the one after will be about how to read music for guitar. Now again, you may think to yourself, well, that's no good. I'm a crazy gothic guy, and I like to do my shredding, and I like to do this and that and all the others. Well, okay, I'm going to give you a little example just before you tune out. Okay, you couldn't get much more gothic than Paganini. He was an incredibly famous violinist from a few hundred years ago. In fact, they thought he was in league with the devil, because he could play so fluently, and they wouldn't even bury him in consecrated ground originally. I think they dug him up and put him somewhere else eventually. And he was, I suppose you could say, the Joe Satriani of his day in a lot of ways, or the Steve Vai or whatever. But the great thing here is, and this is where reading dots is very useful, everything Paganini ever played was written down. So if you really want to find out about how he was a several hundred years old version of shredding on a violin, then that would be a fantastic resource to be able to unlock that. And if you can't read dots, you can't do that. So there's always going to be a use for these different bits of information. As I've said in the past, there are certain projects where I've used dots, there are certain projects where I've used tab, there are certain projects where I've used my own system, and there's been many where I've used all three in varying quantities. So it's all about what fits the best. You don't want a one size fits all, otherwise you're in a situation of trying to pick up a nail with a vacuum cleaner instead of bending over and picking the thing up. Anyway, so I'm not nagging, well I suppose I am a bit, but not too much hopefully. So thanks very much for listening, and if you could press the subscribe button, that'd be fantastic, and I'll be back soon with a bit more about tabs and a bit more about dots. Anyway, thanks a lot. Bye for now.